Hi there, it's me, Finn, and tonight we're going to talk about something strange, dusty, and oddly cozy. We've all heard of the Wild West, gunfights, dusty boots, creaky saloon doors, but you won't believe what's often left out of the picture. They weren't just drinking whiskey and playing poker, they were hungry too. Yep, men and women who walked into those saloons, they had long rides behind them, days in the saddle, and empty bellies. So, what did they eat? What food was actually served in Wild West saloons? What filled the tables, the pans, and sometimes even the hands of those travelers and gamblers and wanderers? And even more quietly, who made that food, and where did it come from in the middle of nowhere? It's a slow story, with biscuits and beans, dusty aprons, creaky kitchens, and maybe the smell of coffee burning just a little too long. Let's start by subscribing, so you don't miss the stories that help you sleep. Now, let's head west, and walk right through the saloon doors. Picture it. The year is somewhere around 1875. A tiny frontier town in the middle of a desert landscape. Maybe Arizona, maybe Wyoming, maybe just a dot on a map that only had 2 streets and 1 main watering hole. And in that watering hole, a saloon, with a long bar made of rough-cut wood. The mirror behind it, cracked. The shelves, filled with bottles, not all labeled. The piano, out of tune. The men, dusty from weeks on the trail. The women, some behind the counter, some upstairs, some just sitting near the windows, watching time drift like tumbleweeds. But there, tucked in the corner, was something people rarely talk about. A short counter, a kettle, a fire burning low, and a woman named Maybelle, sleeves rolled up, apron faded, stirring a pot that had been cooking since dawn. Yep, that was the food corner, the real hidden heart of a saloon. Because believe it or not, people didn't just drink, they ate. Sometimes they ate a lot. It wasn't a fancy menu, no one asked for a wine list. But if your stomach had been empty since sunrise, anything warm was a treasure. So what did Maybelle serve? The most common thing was beans. Pinto beans, usually, cooked slowly in a cast-iron pot, with bacon grease or a little salt pork if she could get her hands on it. They called it Cowboy caviar, though it was anything but elegant. The beans were hearty, filling, quietly bubbling all day, soaking up the smoke from the fire and the dust from the road. They were served with a thick iron ladle, dropped into a dented tin bowl. The customers, they sat on creaky stools, ate with their hats still on, boots dusty, eyes heavy. Sometimes they didn't even talk while they ate, just chewed, thought, watched the door. Next to the beans, there was usually a pan of sourdough biscuits. Now these weren't like the ones you find in bakeries today. These were rugged, a little burned on the bottom, made from flour, salt and sourdough starter that Maybelle kept in a jar hidden behind the stove. That starter, it was her pride and joy. She'd had it for years, fed it every night, talked to it softly when she was alone. She said it made the biscuits rise better, and maybe it did, but that wasn't all. If it was a good week, and someone had passed through town with game, you might get venison stew. Tender if it had cooked long enough, chewy if it hadn't. The stew was served hot, with chunks of potato, maybe a few carrots if the train had delivered fresh produce. That was rare. More often than not, vegetables were canned, preserved with salt, heavy, a little metallic in flavor, but people didn't complain. Not out here. One old man named Wilkes used to sit by the window every evening. He'd ask for the usual, which meant beans and a biscuit, and if Maybelle had it, a splash of coffee that had been on the stove since sunrise. Now the coffee, that was a whole ritual of its own. See, saloon coffee was rarely fresh. It was brewed early and left to sit. The grounds floated. It was thick, bitter. Some said it could clean rust off a spur. But, if you were bone-tired, saddle-sore, and hadn't slept in 2 days, it was comfort. A warm, bitter, familiar comfort. Some saloons tried to go fancier. A place in Dodge City offered scrambled eggs, made from powdered eggs shipped in crates from Chicago, mixed with a bit of milk, fried in bacon grease. Another saloon in Nevada served fried oysters, shipped all the way from California, in barrels packed with ice and sawdust. Rare, expensive, smelled, a bit off sometimes. But customers ordered them anyway, just to feel rich for a moment. Yep, oysters, in the desert, strange times. Now don't think the food was always good. It wasn't. Sometimes the beans were too salty, sometimes the meat was stringy, sometimes the biscuits were more brick than bread, but people still ate them. They were warm, they were cooked, and they meant you were alive. Late at night, when the piano stopped playing, and the last gambler had passed out at the table, Mabel would sit by the stove, just her, and the glow of the embers, and the last biscuit on the pan. She never ate first, always last. She said it tasted better that way. Oh, and there was jerky, always jerky, hard, dry, spiced with whatever someone had on hand. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was mysterious. You chewed it for minutes, maybe longer. It kept your jaw busy, kept your hands from shaking. And in the silence of the night, when coyotes howled far off and the floor creaked under footsteps that didn't belong, that jerky reminded you were still grounded, still here. And there were pies, but only on special days, if someone had apples, or peaches in a can, or maybe just dried fruit rehydrated with sugar and a little water, crust made from lard and flour, rolled with a bottle, baked in the same pan that held the beans. When those pies came out, people smiled. Even the toughest cowhands, even the gamblers with broken dreams, they smiled, just for a moment. And then, there were the stories, told quietly, over plates scraped clean, over mugs filled halfway, over that last bite of biscuit, stories about the trail, about a horse that didn't make it, about a love left behind, and always, about food, about that one time in Austin where someone found a restaurant with cloth napkins, or about a camp cook who made cornbread better than your mama ever could. Stories passed with crumbs, and ended in yawns. So, now you know, Wild West saloons weren't just places for noise and chaos, they were warm corners of comfort, strange little kitchens in the middle of nowhere. The food wasn't perfect, but it filled the space between dust and dreams, between one trail and the next, and out there, that was everything. Piles. As the sun sets behind the hills, and the sound of boots fades into silence, the saloon doors stop swinging, and Maybelle's stove still glows faintly. There's one biscuit left, and a pot of beans still warm, and maybe, just maybe, you're hungry too, but not for food, maybe just for sleep. You might think cooking out here was simple, just toss beans in a pot and wait, right? But no, it wasn't just about cooking. It was survival, pride, habit, even tradition, shaped by the quiet hands of people whose names were never written down. And out here, in this little wooden saloon with its tired floorboards and crooked walls, every dish had a secret, and every secret had a sound. There's something about the crackle of a fire just before dawn, before the bar opens, before the boots thump in, before the piano is even uncovered. That's when the cooking begins. It was usually a woman who started it, sometimes two, and their names, well, people forgot, but we remember tonight. Let's call them Maybelle and Clara. They weren't related, but they worked together like twin stars in the kitchen's slow orbit. Maybelle stirred the beans, Clara kneaded the dough. Neither said much, they didn't need to. Their movements were quiet, rhythmic, they didn't even look tired. They were part of the stove, the fire, the scent of salt and ash and steam. Now, let's talk about flour. Sounds boring. Just powder, dust. But no, it was treasure. Flour had to be brought in by wagon. Long rides, through heat, through snow, through rainstorms that soaked the sacks and turned them to glue. So when a saloon had flour, it meant luck, good timing, or a clever bar owner who knew who to bribe. Flour was for biscuits, for dumplings, for gravy thickened until it stuck to your ribs. Maybelle kept her flour in a wooden barrel, covered with a tin lid. Every morning she'd scoop out just enough, never more. Waste was dangerous. Waste meant hunger next week. Clara's job was water. Now water sounds easy. Turn on a tap. Nope. In 1875, water meant walking half a mile to the pump or well, or sending a boy with a bucket, and a hope that the well hadn't dried up. They needed water for the coffee, for the stew, for the dough, but most of all, for washing. That's right, dishes. They didn't have sinks with hot running water. They had a tin basin, a cloth, and lye soap that stung your fingers, so every plate was washed by hand, scrubbed, set to dry in the sun, or near the stove. Some saloons didn't bother. They just wiped plates and used them again. Now that's a thought to chew on. So how did they cook? Not with gas, not with timers. They cooked with firewood, dry if you were lucky, damp if it had rained. And they had to split it, stack it, and feed it carefully. A stove had no knobs. You couldn't set it to 350 degrees. You had to know it, by feel, by sound, by the way the flame moved. Clara could tell if the heat was too high just by holding her hand above the kettle. 5 seconds, too cool. 1 second, too hot. She never used a thermometer, just her skin, her eyes, her nose. Breakfast started early. If you wanted something hot before riding out, you had to be at the saloon just as the sun peeked over the ridge. There on the table were fried potatoes, browned in lard, sometimes mixed with bits of onion, salt pork, crisped in a pan, salty and strong, cornmeal mush, thick, warm, eaten with molasses, if the bar owner could afford it. Coffee, always coffee, thick, dark, with grit at the bottom of the mug. If you were lucky, you got eggs, but they weren't always fresh. Out here, chickens were rare. Eggs were shipped in crates, wrapped in straw, and if one cracked, you smelled it before you saw it. Still, people asked for them, fried, scrambled, even boiled in river water if you had to. Why? Because eggs reminded them of home. Maybelle once said, cooking wasn't about filling bellies, it was about reminding people of something gentler, a kitchen, a mother, a memory of Sunday breakfast long ago. That's why she folded her biscuits just once. That's how her mama taught her. That's why she never rushed the beans. She said beans should think before they're eaten. And the meat. Meat was a journey all its own. You couldn't just order beef. Someone had to hunt, skin, butcher, salt, or trade it in. That meant you might eat deer, or elk, or rabbit. And if you were on the edge of the desert, sometimes, rattlesnake. Don't wrinkle your nose. They said it tasted like chicken. Every day around noon the heat got heavier, the kitchen swelled with steam, flies buzzed, sweat dripped into pots. That's when they made midday stew. It sat on the stove for hours, a mix of leftovers, a bone, if they had one, salt, onion, maybe turnip. It wasn't pretty, but oh, it filled your soul. And in the corner of the room, near the stove,
was a little chalkboard. It read, hot plate, 5 cents, coffee free with refill. That was the menu, just 2 lines, but for someone who hadn't eaten since yesterday, those 2 lines were worth riding 100 miles for. One cowboy named Eli used to say, the stew here tastes like rain. No one knew what he meant, but everyone nodded, because somehow, he was right. And on Sundays, the saloon tried something rare. Roast chicken, cooked in a Dutch oven, stuffed with cornbread crumbs and onion, and wild sage, served with gravy made from the pan drippings. If you got a plate of that, you remembered it forever. But what about dessert? Oh yes, dessert. There were sugar cookies, sometimes, made with lard, pressed with a fork, or apple brown Betty, if someone had dried apples soaked overnight. Sometimes they made molasses cake, poured into a hot skillet, and flipped with a knife. It wasn't always sweet, but it was soft, warm, and it told your tongue that life, even out here, could be soft for a moment. As night fell, the kitchen slowed, the pans were cleaned, the fire dimmed. The women sat quietly. They never called it closing time. There was no clock, just a silence that arrived slowly. And Maybelle, she'd count the biscuit crumbs left on the tin tray. She said they told her how good a day it had been. More crumbs, less trouble, she whispered once. Clara just smiled. In the Wild West, people thought danger came from guns. But no, danger came from hunger. And in those little saloons, those rough wooden kitchens, with old kettles and creaky shelves, safety came in the form of food. Not fancy food, just warm food, real food. So tonight, if you close your eyes, and you smell beans on the stove, and hear the soft clink of a tin cup, you're not dreaming, you're just there, sitting quietly in the corner, watching Maybelle stir, and maybe, you can almost taste the biscuit, still warm, still safe, still waiting.
Have you ever noticed how smells can travel through time? One whiff of wood smoke, and suddenly, you're back in a campfire circle. A hint of cinnamon, and your mind floats to a pie cooling by the window. That's what it was like here. Even in the loudest, roughest saloon towns, food had a way of whispering things from far away, because, well, none of the ingredients in these kitchens were born here. Not really. Everything was brought in, by hand, by wagon, by stubborn hope. So tonight, we follow those journeys. Start with beans. They were everywhere, on every stove, in every pot, on every plate. Why? Because they could travel. Dry beans didn't rot. They didn't need ice. Just a sack and a little space on a cart. Cowboys carried them in saddlebags. Settlers stored them in barrels. Bartenders kept them in crates behind the kitchen wall. Pinto, navy, red kidney, black-eyed peas. Beans could survive a year in the desert if you let them. And when you boiled them long enough, added salt pork, onion, maybe even dried chili flakes. You could feed 10 men with just a handful. Now picture this. A wooden crate, rattling along the Oregon Trail, filled not with gold, not with bullets, but spices. Yep, spices. Cinnamon, nutmeg, even clove. Strange, isn't it? People out here, so far from comfort, still brought flavor with them. Of course, it wasn't for fancy meals. No, spices were medicine too. Nutmeg helped with stomach aches. Cinnamon kept meat from smelling too strong. Even dried pepper helped warm your body on cold nights. So the cooks at these saloons, they weren't just making stew. They were healing something inside you, even if they didn't know it. Now think about butter. Creamy, golden, slippery like sunlight in a skillet. But how do you get butter in the middle of the Wild West? You don't, unless you make it. And that meant cows. Or at the very least, a kind neighbor with a churn. So some saloons paid locals, women with small farms, to bring in butter every few days. Not in sticks, not in boxes, but wrapped in muslin cloth, cooled in root cellars, or packed in cracked pottery. It melted fast, spoiled faster. But for a biscuit in the morning? Oh, it was worth it. There's an old recipe scribbled on the back of a newspaper, found in a collapsed saloon kitchen somewhere in Montana. It read, 1 scoop cornmeal, 2 scoops hot water, salt, bacon grease. If you got it, fry till brown on both sides, eat with coffee. No name, no title, just the words. That was survival food. Cornmeal was everywhere. It was cheaper than flour, easier to carry, and quicker to cook. It made johnny cakes, grits, even bread baked in a cast-iron pan, right over the flames. You didn't need yeast, just time and heat, and a little patience. Clara once said, if you can't bake bread, fry it. And then there were the oddities. Things you didn't expect to find, but did. Like canned oysters. Yes, oysters, in the desert. Because the railroads brought strange things. And some saloons, especially in boomtowns, liked to show off. Oysters were shipped in sealed cans from the East Coast, floating in salty brine. Expensive, rare, but oh, did they spark conversation. They were served cold, on tin plates with vinegar, and people sat wide-eyed, chewing sea creatures under desert stars. Let's not forget molasses. Dark, sticky, sweet, shipped in barrels, poured by the ladle, used to sweeten cornbread, beans, coffee, even medicine. Children loved it. Adults too. It clung to your fingers, your teeth, your memories. Some said it reminded them of Christmas back home, even if they hadn't seen snow in 10 years. Ever heard of jerky? Of course you have. But the real stuff? It was nothing like what we chew today. Back then, jerky was thin strips of meat, beef, deer, buffalo, dried in the sun, rubbed with salt, sometimes smoked over cedar or applewood. It was tough. You had to gnaw it, work for it, but it could last weeks, and it was safe when all the fresh meat was gone. That's why saloon keepers kept some under the counter, for snacks, or bribes, or just in case someone stumbled in starving. But now, let's talk about the cookbooks. Yes, even here, not many, just a few, but they existed. Tattered little books with titles like Receipts for the Frontier Wife, The Prairie Hearth, Cookin' by Campfire Light. Inside, the pages were stained, corners folded, recipes handwritten between printed lines, and inside those notes, secrets passed from hand to hand, like, add a coin to the boiling water, if it sings it's hot enough, drop a crumb in the lard, if it dances fry is ready, small things, but true things. Truth passed through steam. By the way, not all cooks in saloons were women. Sometimes they were old cowboys, retired scouts, Chinese immigrants, freed slaves, even former gamblers who'd lost everything but a skillet. They came with different ideas, different spices, different rituals, and each one left a little flavor behind. That's why no two saloon meals tasted the same, even if the menu looked identical. Let's wander back to that saloon kitchen now, the one with the dented kettle and the blackened stove. Maybelle is grinding coffee beans with a little iron crank. Clara is stirring molasses into a pan of cornmeal. It smells like burnt sugar and smoke, and outside, the boots are stomping, the piano's warming up, the bar stools are filling. But in here, time slows, because behind every hot meal is 100 cold nights. Behind every bite is a journey. So the next time you wonder how people lived back then, don't look at the guns, or the horses, or the maps. Look at the biscuits, the stew, the crumb at the bottom of the plate. That's where the real stories are. Still warm, still waiting, still whispering. Imagine it's evening, the sun's bleeding down into the dust. The lanterns are lit. Inside the saloon, the room is buzzing. Soft chatter, boots scuffing floorboards, the occasional clink of a coin on wood. It's not a wild night. Not yet. This is the quiet hour, the time just before the storm. You step up to the bar, and beside the whiskey bottles and tobacco tins is something unexpected. A small bowl, filled with beans. Yep, free beans. Many saloons, especially in the quieter towns, offered a free lunch. Sounds generous, right? But it wasn't quite free. The catch? You had to buy a drink. One drink, usually whiskey, often watered down, got you a tin plate of food, and the bartender didn't care how many plates you filled, as long as you kept drinking. So men came in hungry, bought a drink, and filled up on what they really wanted: food. It was a smart trick, and a common one. But what kind of food did they get? Here comes the tin tray. On it, a pile of hot beans, maybe with a bit of pork fat on top. A square of salted bread, hard at the edges, soft in the middle. A thin slice of cold meat, usually ham or dried beef, folded like a ribbon. And next to it, a little pile of pickled vegetables, sometimes onions, sometimes carrots, sometimes something unrecognizable. There might be cheese too, but not the soft creamy kind. No, this was dry cheese, often aged into a hard wedge that squeaked against your teeth. Cut with a dull knife, served on a broken plate. You're probably wondering how all this was cooked, because we left the women in the kitchen with their cast iron pans, their cornmeal and beans. But here's the truth. Most saloons didn't have chefs. They had cooks. And those cooks had to do everything by feel. No timers, no thermometers. If the stew bubbled too loud, it was too hot. If the biscuits didn't rise, the flour was bad. Everything depended on instinct, on touch, on smell. Now let's peek at the utensils. Yep, you probably guessed. No forks, or very few. People ate with spoons, pocket knives, and sometimes just fingers. Plates were made of tin, sometimes enamel, sometimes just carved wood. Cups were shared, washed in cool water, wiped dry with an old cloth, clean enough for the time. And if you dropped something on the floor, well, if no one saw, you might pick it back up. Listen closely. There's a man in the corner. Tall hat, long coat, dusty boots. He's eating something odd. It looks like pie. Yes, but not sweet. This is a meat pie. Baked earlier in the day, reheated in the stove, filled with shredded rabbit, onions and gravy. The crust is thick, almost tough, but it holds. And that man, he eats it slowly, eyes closed, like it reminds him of something from before. Some saloons went beyond beans and biscuits. If they had more money, or were part of a hotel, they served supper plates. These were more elaborate, but still rough. Maybe roasted chicken legs, blackened at the tips, boiled potatoes with cracked black pepper, fried onions, smoked sausage, gravy poured from a cast iron pan, no garnish, no sides, just hearty food for tired people, people who'd ridden all day, or worked all night, or just needed something hot in their hands. And then there were the ones who couldn't pay, the drifters, the sick, the broken. They didn't buy a drink.
They didn't sit at the bar. They lingered by the back wall, waiting. Sometimes, if the bartender was kind, a plate was passed to them, quietly, without a word. Leftovers, crumbs, the last inch of coffee, and those. Sometimes, those tasted better than gold, because they were given freely, with dignity. Let's look again, Finn. At the center table now, where four old men are playing cards with one hand, and holding spoons in the other. They laugh, they argue, they chew without looking at their plates. Their food is barely warm, but they don't seem to care, because here in the saloon, food is more than fuel. It's a pause, a comfort, a way to feel human, just for a moment. Did you know many of the people who cooked in these saloons were not even allowed to eat at the front tables? It's true. Chinese cooks, Mexican dishwashers, freed black workers. They made the meals, scrubbed the plates, stoked the fires, but they ate last. In the back, in silence, sometimes with the scraps, and yet, they cooked with pride, because every time a stranger licked gravy from his beard, or sighed at the taste of real bread, that was their victory, unspoken, but real. One more thing before the lanterns dim. Let's talk about the rituals. Yes, there were rituals, not prayers, not hymns, but little things people did before eating, like wiping the cup rim with your sleeve, or tapping the edge of your spoon against the table 3 times for luck, or breaking bread in half and handing it to the person beside you. No words, just gestures. Bart. In a land where people came and went without names, food was the only language that stayed. So tonight, if you feel tired, or lonely, or far from home, close your eyes, and listen for the creak of a saloon door, smell the beans, taste the bread, and imagine sitting there who aren't really strangers, because you're all chewing the same stew, drinking the same warm coffee, listening to the same wind howl outside. Let's return, very quietly now, to the back rooms of the saloon. These are not fancy kitchens with tiled walls and brass pots. No, they're narrow, shadowed, smoke-stained. There's a wooden table chipped from use, a single shelf with mismatched spices, and beside the fire, a person with sleeves rolled high and fingers dusted in flour. Yes, this is the cook. Not always a man. In fact, quite often, a woman. Sometimes an older man with a limp. Sometimes a widow needing work. Sometimes an immigrant who spoke little English but knew how to boil a chicken to perfection. They weren't called chefs. They were called cookie, or mama, or just hey you, but they were the heart of every saloon meal. Let's meet one of them. Her name is May. May's in her 40s. She has a faded apron, a tight bun of hair, and a wrist that never seems to stop stirring. She starts her day before the sun, lights the stove, checks the dry bins, cuts bacon with a knife worn thin like paper. She doesn't speak much, but she knows everything, knows which barrel has the good beans, knows how long to soak the cornbread, knows when a cow's been overcooked just by the smell drifting through the floorboards. In another town, there's a cook named Tomas. He's from Oaxaca, barely speaks English, but smiles a lot. He brings with him spices no one can name. Paprika, cumin, chilies dried and crushed. He adds them to stews, gently, respectfully, and suddenly even the old cowboys can't stop licking their fingers. Then there's old Joe. No one remembers when he started working there. He just showed up one winter, asked for shelter, and started cooking breakfast the next morning. He has a crooked back and a deep, slow laugh. His biscuits, they rise like clouds. Even the sheriff says they might be the best thing east of the Rockies. Now let's take a closer look at their tools. On the wall, 3 cast iron pans, blackened from fire, heavy as a saddle, a dented kettle, a pothook for hanging stew over the coals, and near the stove, a bread box with a crooked lid, filled with cornmeal, maybe a bit of weevil crawling near the edges. Yep. It wasn't perfect, but they made it work. There were no refrigerators, no electric ovens, no thermometers, just heat, instinct, and the deep rhythm of daily survival. Cooking wasn't easy. The fire was temperamental. The wind whistled through the cracks in the floorboards. Sometimes the lard went rancid. Sometimes the flour turned clumpy from damp air. But May knew how to test dough by feel. Thomas sniffed meat before slicing. Joe tapped the bottom of his biscuits to hear if they sounded hollow. That's how they knew if things were done. Did you know cooks often slept near their kitchens? Not because they wanted to, but because the fires had to stay warm. The beans had to soak. The sourdough starter needed watching, so they lay on hay mattresses in corners, blankets wrapped tight, listening to the slow gurgle of the kettle beside them, dreaming of nothing, just rest, just heat, just quiet. Sometimes they were called on in the middle of the night. A fight had broken out, a man stabbed, the doc needed broth, or a drunk man needed something warm before he froze on the porch, and the cook would rise, still half asleep, light a match, and start boiling water. Just like that. No complaints, no questions, just care. Let's return to the saloon now. It's noon. The front's busy. People laugh, argue, drink, but the cook is still at work. Now they're chopping onions, their eyes red, tending beans, lifting lids, humming softly. In the heat and grease of the back room, they're completely alone. And completely in control. Every now and then, someone sneaks in with a request. May, got any of that corn pie left? Thomas, can you heat this up for my brother? He can't chew too good. They always say yes, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a grunt, but always, they serve, not for praise, not for tips, just because it's what they do. And at the end of the night, when the last lantern's dimmed, and the bar stools are stacked, that's when the cook eats, quietly, alone, maybe just a crust and stew. They sit at the prep table, elbows on wood, eyes half closed, and sometimes if you watch closely, they smile. because they fed dozens of souls that day, and none of those people knew their name. But the cook didn't need them to. Ah, there's something beautiful in that, isn't there? That invisible kindness, the warmth made with rough hands, the meals that healed without a word. In the Wild West, many were remembered for guns, gold or gallows, but some were remembered for biscuits and soup.
And hot coffee passed through tired hands.
If you listen carefully, Finn, you might still hear the soft scrape of a spoon in a cast iron pan, might still smell burnt crust and bacon grease, might feel the warmth of someone cooking just for you, even if they never asked your name, even if you never said thank you, because that's what cooks do. They care in silence. Let's settle in once more. The air feels softer tonight, doesn't it? You've now tasted the beans, peeked into the kitchens, and stood beside the cooks who worked in silence. But let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered, where did they even get the food? Where did the eggs come from? The coffee? The flour? Because this isn't a world with supermarkets or supply trucks. Every meal in the Wild West saloon had a story before it even touched a plate. And tonight, we're going to follow that story. It begins early, so early that even the roosters haven't stirred. A cold breeze rolls through the plain, and in the dimness of dawn you might spot a man on horseback, a supply rider. He's bringing flour sacks, maybe a crate of eggs, a wheel of cheese wrapped in burlap. Sometimes he comes from the nearest ranch, 10 miles away. Sometimes he's been riding for 3 days straight, and sometimes he brings nothing at all, because see, back then supplies didn't always show up. If a wagon broke an axle, if a river swelled too high, if bandits struck on the trail, then the saloon cook had to make do. But let's say today's a lucky day. Let's follow that supply rider. He reaches the saloon with a grunt and a dust-covered grin, dismounts, unstraps a bundle tied behind his saddle. He's got a burlap sack of coffee beans, some salted pork, a crate of onions, still with dirt on the roots, and, oh, a treat today, a small barrel of molasses. May, the cook, takes it all in with a glance. She nods, doesn't smile, but you can tell, she's grateful. Now, where did all that come from? Let's see. The coffee, likely imported from Brazil or Guatemala, came by ship, then train, then wagon. It's bitter, black, and cowboys drank it by the quart. The pork, probably cured last spring, smoked in a shed out behind someone's barn. Onions. Now those grew in backyard gardens. Nearly every family planted a small patch of vegetables. Carrots, potatoes, beans, squash. So if the saloon wanted something fresh, they traded. 2 cups of molasses for a bushel of corn, 3 eggs for a pitcher of ale. Let's take a moment to talk about eggs. Simple, right? But back then, they were gold. A good hen could lay maybe 5 or 6 a week. So if you wanted eggs for breakfast, someone had to raise chickens nearby. Sometimes the saloon kept their own hens in a little coop behind the building. Other times, a local widow brought a basket of eggs every Wednesday. You wouldn't believe how precious that basket was. People even had favorite hens. Oh, that's from Clara's hen. She lays rich yolks. Don't take Nellie's eggs. She's been eating bugs again. Funny, isn't it? But that's how close food was. Every egg had a name behind it. And what about bread? Well, most flour was ground at a local mill. That is, if the river was high enough to turn the water wheel. If not, no flour. When flour did arrive, it came in cloth sacks, stamped with ink. Sometimes women reused those sacks to make dresses for their daughters. Imagine that, a little girl twirling in a dress made from the same bag that held her breakfast. Life was that close to itself. But let's not forget, not all saloons were in busy towns. Some were in tiny outposts, dusty places barely clinging to a railroad track or mining tunnel. Out there, things got even tougher. The food had to travel by train from Kansas City or St. Louis, sometimes even farther, and when it came, it was usually in tin cans. Beef stew, corn, peaches, tomatoes. Canned food was a miracle, expensive, heavy, and precious. But oh, when you popped open a can of peaches in winter, even the meanest outlaw would smile. There were seasons to it too. In summer, cooks used fresh greens, dandelion leaves, wild onions. They'd fry them with bacon and call it a salad. In fall, it was preserving time. Jars filled with pickled beets, chutneys, apple butter, whole shelves lined with little glass windows into the harvest. Come winter, those jars were gold. No snowstorm could stop a good cook with a cupboard full of preserves. And what about meat? Well, there were ranchers, sure, but they didn't always sell to saloons. Meat spoiled quickly, especially in heat, so cooks salted it, dried it, turned it into jerky. Tough, salty, and filling. Some saloons even made their own sausages, stuffed them with whatever they had. Pork, fat, spices, sometimes even breadcrumbs. Not pretty, but filling. And sometimes, they served rabbit, or squirrel, or if you were lucky, prairie chicken, caught that morning, skinned on a stump out back, thrown into a stew with onions, a splash of whiskey, and hope. One of the strangest ingredients though, cactus. Yep, cooked right, nopal cactus becomes tender, like green beans, add salt and butter, and even the cowboys would ask for seconds. It came from the hands of Mexican cooks, passed down in silence, without recipe books, just memory, and taste. Let's take one more breath. Imagine a wagon rolling through the desert, wheels creaking, mules braying, inside, 3 sacks of flour, 2 barrels of lard, 1 crate of dried apples. The journey is slow, the trail dusty, but the supplies arrive.
The cook greets them, and a few hours later, you sit at the saloon table, a warm biscuit, a tin mug of coffee, a slice of apple pie, slightly burned on one edge. You chew, you swallow, you smile. You have no idea what it took to make that meal happen, but the cook does. That's the magic of the Wild West saloon, Finn. The stories didn't just happen at the bar. They happened in root cellars, in gardens, on wagons rolling across endless land, in hands that chopped, boiled, salted, stirred. Food didn't come from a shelf. It came from lives. And that perhaps is why every meal felt so warm. Tonight feels like the kind of night where you'd want something warm in your hands, something sweet, or at least softer than dry beans and bitter coffee. Because while most of the Wild West saloon menu was built on things like salt pork, stew and hard biscuits, there were rare fleeting moments when something different made its way onto a plate, and, you wouldn't believe what folks could do with just a little flour, sugar and a bit of luck. Let's begin by stepping into a saloon kitchen. Now, don't imagine anything too fancy. No polished counters, no ovens with dials. Just a wood-burning stove, a scarred workbench, maybe a shelf where sacks of flour slumped under their own weight, and in the middle of it all, a cook. Not always a man, and often not very friendly, but they could make miracles happen with scraps. Have you ever heard of a thing called Johnny cakes? They weren't much to look at, just little flat rounds made from cornmeal, salt and water, sometimes fried in bacon grease, sometimes grilled over open flame. But they were warm, a little crispy at the edges, and if you were lucky, someone would share a spoon of molasses to drizzle on top. Folks ate them at breakfast, lunch and dinner, and when they ran out of everything else, they made Johnny cakes anyway. And then, there was hardtack. Hardtack was a biscuit, but not the kind you'd smile about. It was, well, hard, like a brick, made from flour and water, baked until it could last for months, or years. Soldiers carried it in the Civil War. Miners kept it in their packs. Cowboys gnawed on it when nothing else was left. It was dry, dusty, and you had to soak it in coffee or stew just to eat it without breaking a tooth. And still, it fed generations of travelers across the plains. But what if someone had a little more? A few eggs, a cup of milk, maybe even a little sugar. Then came flour pudding, or apple slump, or even something fancy sounding like raisin duff. Raisin duff. Now that was a dessert of sorts, made from boiled dough mixed with raisins or dried berries, steamed in a pot until fluffy, sort of. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't delicate, but it was sweet and warm, and it reminded people of their mothers, or grandmothers, or the places they left behind. Now imagine it's Sunday night in the saloon. The week's labor is done. There's a stillness in the air. The cards are on the table, but no one's playing yet. Someone brings out a plate of corn dodgers, fried cornmeal cakes. Another carries a pot of hot beans, seasoned with wild onions, found along the trail. There might even be a jar of pickled vegetables passed down the line. Not store-bought pickles, but cucumbers, soaked in vinegar with peppercorns and garlic. Sharp, sour, a jolt after days of heavy salt and meat. And then, from somewhere in the back, the smell of pie. Pie, yes. If the saloon had a deal with the local baker, or if a woman passing through needed coin, there'd be pie, apple if you were lucky, rhubarb if it was spring, dried peach soaked overnight, and sweetened with whatever sugar was left in the barrel. The crust was thick, never flaky, but when you cut in with your spoon, steam rose like a spell. You'd lean in, the room would quiet just a little, and even the rowdiest man would go silent before the first bite. There was also something called chuck, not just food, but the whole meal, everything on the plate. The cook was sometimes called a chuck wagon man, even in town, and his supplies were known as chuck. Chuck could be whatever fit in a pot, beans with bacon grease, salt beef with boiled cabbage, boiled coffee, and maybe, just maybe, dried fruit pie for dessert. Now here's something odd. Some saloons served canned food. That's right. As railroads expanded and stores popped up in small towns, saloons began stocking canned peaches, canned tomatoes, and even canned oysters. Canned oysters. In the Wild West, people opened them on special nights, birthdays, payday, or if someone just needed to feel rich for a moment. They were eaten straight from the tin, with a spoon, maybe passed around to share. It sounds strange, but out there, even oysters in a can were a luxury. And let's not forget cheese. A big wheel of cheddar, often dry and slightly cracked. People cut off hunks with their knives, eating it with hard bread or thick slices of ham. It wasn't creamy, wasn't soft, but it was real food. Heavy, dense, a reminder that something had aged properly, waited, developed flavor in a world that moved fast and wild. And if you sat long enough and sipped your coffee just slow enough, you might even be offered a peppermint stick, or a few jawbreakers from a jar behind the bar. Not common, but when they appeared, a hush fell over the table. Candy wasn't just sugar, it was memory, childhood, safety, even for men with 6 shooters on their hips and dust on their boots. You see, the saloon was never about grand meals or fine dining. It was about survival, but it was also about comfort. Even small comfort, a piece of warm pie, a soft biscuit, a sip of coffee sweetened just enough. And these foods, they held stories of mothers and wives, of railroads and rivers, of lonely nights and long friendships. Food kept people going. It reminded them where they came from, and maybe, just maybe, it helped them forget where they were. So tonight, as you drift a little deeper into thought, think of a tin plate resting on a rough-hewn table. A biscuit split by calloused hands, steam rising, and a silence that felt like peace for just a moment. That was food in the Wild West saloon, and it fed more than just hunger. It fed hope. So now we've eaten, beans and bacon, Johnny cakes and biscuits, even a sliver of pie if you were lucky. But food wasn't the only thing that filled those dusty saloons. No, there was something just as essential, just as carefully poured: drink.
The wild saloon world spun not just on hunger, but on the clink of glass, the burn of whiskey, and the deep silence that followed a sip too many. Let's sink into that for a while, shall we? In the early hours of the evening, the saloon shelves began to glimmer, not with gold or silver, but with bottles, rows of them, amber, brown, clear as the prairie sky, and inside, a drink that went by many names. Whiskey, yes, but also rotgut, snakebite, even just firewater. And oh, you won't believe this, but many of those drinks, they weren't even close to the whiskey we know today. You see, true whiskey had to be aged. It needed years in wooden barrels to mellow, to grow richer, smoother. But the Wild West didn't wait. Saloons often served raw grain alcohol, hastily distilled in the East, or even brewed in back rooms. It was clear, sharp, like swallowing a flame. To mask the burn, barkeeps added flavor. Things like tobacco juice, burnt sugar, molasses, red pepper, even turpentine. They said it put hair on your chest, but it often just put men flat on the floor. Now imagine a drink poured from a dusty bottle, sloshed into a tin cup or cracked glass. A man lifts it slow, smells it, winces, and drinks anyway. Why? Because after days in the sun, after hauling fence posts or riding trail, that fire in your throat felt like waking up. Even if just for a moment. But whiskey wasn't the only option. No, there was also beer, though not the frosty golden kind we know today. Most beer in the frontier west wasn't cold, refrigeration was rare, and ice, it had to be hauled in blocks across miles. So beer arrived warm, cloudy, and often sour, brewed locally in small batches, or shipped in barrels that sloshed across railcars and wagons. People still drank it. They didn't care if it was flat or foamy, it was something to wash the dust down. Now here's something odd. Saloons also served wine, but not the delicate red from a French vineyard. No, this was frontier wine, often made from dried fruit, fermented sugar and hope. There was something called raisin jack, a bootleg creation made by soaking raisins in water, adding sugar, then letting it ferment in barrels that no one dared to clean. It was sweet, until it wasn't, and it could make a man forget his name. And then came the cocktails. That's right, even in the Wild West, there was a little style behind the bar. Some saloons, especially in growing towns, had barkeeps who learned tricks from back east. A touch of bitters here, a swirl of honey there. They made drinks like whiskey punch, gin slings, even an early version of the mint julep, if they had the mint. And while the dusty cowboys might raise an eyebrow at the flourish, they'd still drink it down, especially if someone else was buying. Now let's talk about coffee pots. Yes, in the same saloon where whiskey poured and fists flew, there was almost always a pot of coffee on the fire. Strong, black, bitter as winter wind. Made from overboiled grounds, strained through a cloth, if strained at all. Sometimes flavored with salt, or even eggshells to reduce the bitterness. Cowboys drank it before a fight, prospectors sipped it at dawn, and for the barkeep it was the last thing they offered to a man before pushing him out the door. Have a cup of coffee, son, then go find your horse. And what about sarsaparilla? It wasn't just a funny word in old westerns, it was real, a sweet, dark drink made from roots, sometimes fermented, sometimes not. Kids drank it, women drank it, even the toughest gunslingers drank it when they needed something gentle. It tasted a little like root beer, earthy, rich, like a whisper from the forest. And here's something lovely, some saloons brewed tea. Not always leaves from far-off places, but herbs found near their own doorstep. Mint, sage, chamomile, picked, dried and steeped in kettles when the night grew cold and the wind slipped through the shutters. Tea wasn't just for the sick, it was for the quiet souls, the lonesome ones, the ones who didn't speak but needed warmth. And then there was water. Yes, water, rare, precious, always suspect. If the saloon had its own well, they'd brag about it. If they hauled it from the river, well, they hoped no one saw where it came from. Still, water was always there. In jugs on counters, in barrels out back, and if someone looked too tired or too sick, the barkeep might slide them a cup for free. No words, just water, because in the Wild West, mercy was currency too. There's something strangely tender about the way people drank back then. It wasn't always about the buzz, sometimes it was about belonging, sitting at a bar and being poured something warm, or hot, or just enough to get through the night. Drinks told stories too, of tired journeys, of luck, good and bad, of laughter that came too easy, or sorrow that came too late, and when the glass hit the table, whether full or empty, it echoed like a heartbeat in the wooden bones of that old saloon. So tonight, Finn, as your eyes grow heavier, let your thoughts swirl like steam rising from a battered mug, and imagine a saloon at midnight, the lanterns low, the music fading, and someone, somewhere, lifting a glass, just one more time, to friendship, to firelight, to the road behind, and whatever comes next. So we've had our fill of beans and biscuits, washed them down with a slow pour of dusty saloon whiskey, and maybe even a splash of raisin jack or bitter coffee. But, let's not leave the table just yet, because the story of food in the Wild West doesn't end at what was served. No, it also lives in how it was prepared, and perhaps even more curiously, who prepared it. You might think of the cook in a saloon as a grizzled man with a stained apron and a sharp tongue, and you wouldn't be wrong. But that's only a sliver of the truth. Let's wander into the kitchen now, shall we? Behind every saloon's swinging doors there was another set of doors, usually smaller, less grand, creakier. Beyond them was the kitchen. It wasn't big. Most times it was no larger than a horse stall, and it wasn't bright. Just a few oil lamps, smoke curling above pots, heat pressing against every wall like a heavy blanket. Here, in this cramped space, entire meals were born, beans boiled, bacon crackled, flour turned to bread with nothing but water, lard and elbow grease, and the person stirring those pots was often someone no one noticed. Sometimes it was a former cowboy, too old for the trail, too stubborn to leave town. Other times it was a woman, maybe the wife of the saloon owner, maybe not. And in many towns, it was someone with skin darker than most. Mexican cooks, freed black men, Chinese immigrants who had followed the railroads westward, all found their way into those tiny kitchens. Now let's think about that. Every single plate of food in those wild frontier towns was often cooked by the invisible hands of those history forgot. The Chinese cooks, especially, brought flavors that the West had never tasted. They boiled rice when no one else did. They added ginger and green onions to broth. And sometimes, when given a rare moment of freedom, they cooked for themselves, steamed dumplings, salted fish, or simple tea eggs that reminded them of home. But most days, they cooked American food for American men. Cornbread, beans, gravy thick as mud. And they did it well. So well, in fact, that many saloons quietly competed to hire them. Because a good cook meant more regulars, and regulars meant more coin in the till. Let's pause here. Can you picture it? That tight, smoky space. A slab of pork sizzling in a cast iron pan. The sound of chopping, quick, steady. The clank of iron on iron as a kettle is moved to make room for another. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the heart of the saloon. The smell of that kitchen drifted into the main hall and told tired men that they were safe, just for a moment. Now here's something curious. Most kitchens in saloons didn't have stoves like we think of today. They had open hearths or wood-burning ranges. Heat was uneven. Flames were unpredictable. If you weren't careful, you'd burn the bread and your knuckles with it. So cooks learned to feel the heat with their palms. They tossed in a handful of cornmeal to test a pan's readiness. They used their nose, their ears, their instinct. And they reused everything. Drippings from bacon became the fat for frying eggs. Old biscuits were crumbled into stews. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was wasted. Because in the Wild West, waste was a luxury. Now, let's talk about time. The kitchen never really stopped. Before the sun rose, the cook was already awake, stirring oatmeal, heating beans from the night before, and long after the last poker hand was played, they were still scrubbing pans, wiping counters, preparing for tomorrow. Sleep came in bursts. Meals came in shifts. Sometimes the cook never even saw the faces they fed, just heard them, laughing, arguing, singing beyond the walls. Their satisfaction echoed louder than thanks. But every once in a while, someone would lean through the doorway and say, "Best cornbread I've had in weeks," and that was enough. Now, let's drift back to something a bit slower. Not the rush of a dinner hour, but the quiet hum of preparation. A cook pulling dough by lamplight, hands white with flour, whistling softly, just to fill the silence. Or maybe humming an old tune from back east, or far, far across the ocean. Food carried memory, you see. Not just fuel for the body, but whispers from childhood, from lands left behind. Even a simple onion soup, or a flapjack with too much molasses, could remind someone of a mother, or a friend, or the place they once called home. And while we're here, let's talk about the utensils. There were no blenders, no electric ovens, no digital timers ticking down, just knives, cast iron pans, wooden spoons, stone crocks, heavy kettles that hung over fire. Everything had weight. Even the ladles could bruise a foot if dropped. But oh, how they lasted. Some tools passed from cook to cook, decade after decade, seasoned not just with oil, but with memory. And in all that heat, that work, that grease and smoke, there was something gentle, something rhythmic. The same way you or I might wash dishes to clear our mind, or knead dough to find peace, the saloon cook found a rhythm. Slice, stir, pour, wait. And in that rhythm, even surrounded by shouting men and slamming doors, there was a strange kind of calm. The next time you see an old Western film, with its dancing girls and its pistols and its swinging saloon doors, pause for a moment, and think of the kitchen you can't see. The person standing over a pot, wiping sweat from their brow with a cloth tied round their head. The one who never made the history books, but fed the very people who did. So as you rest tonight, Finn, with your eyes half closed and your breathing slowing, picture that kitchen, the oil lamp flickering, a kettle whispering its soft steam, and someone stirring slowly, just enough to keep tomorrow warm. So we've peeked inside the saloon kitchen, seen the worn ladles, the glowing hearth, the cooks humming softly in the dim lamplight. But the food story of the Wild West, it doesn't stop at the saloon doors. No, not at all. Because even though saloons served food, they didn't always make everything themselves. There was another quiet figure in the background, another forgotten piece of the puzzle. Let's wander toward the back alleys now, the stables, the outer sheds and wagons that rolled in like whispers on dust. That's where you'd find the suppliers, the bakers, the butchers, the milkmen, the brewers, and sometimes the wandering women with baskets of fresh eggs and hand-churned butter wrapped in cloth. Saloons may have been the end point for food, but there was a whole living chain behind it, humming quietly through the town. Let's begin with the butcher. In most towns he was easy to find. Just follow your nose. The shop smelled of sawdust, blood, and brine. Inside you'd see carcasses hanging like shadows, slabs of beef, cuts of pork, strips of dried jerky nailed to wooden beams. The butcher didn't just chop. He cured, he salted, he smoked, because refrigeration, it wasn't really a thing. Ice was rare and precious, so instead, meats were kept cool in cellars, packed in salt, or hung in dry, airy sheds where wind did the preserving. Can you imagine that smell? A strange mix of pepper, meat, smoke, and thyme. Then, there were the bakers, usually just one in a town. He rose before the sun, always. By the time the town was stirring, his ovens were roaring. Bread in the Wild West wasn't fancy. No baguettes, no braided loaves, just thick, round, floury discs. Simple, but satisfying, sometimes flavored with lard, sometimes with a pinch of sugar or dried cornmeal, and if you were lucky, cinnamon. The saloon cook might wander by with a small sack of flour and barter for loaves in bulk. One for today, one for tomorrow, one to turn into breadcrumbs for stew. And there was the milker. Now that's a job rarely remembered. But in every town someone had a cow or two, and in the early morning under the pink sky they'd sit on little stools, pail between knees, coaxing warm milk from quiet animals. The milk never stayed fresh long, so it had to move fast, straight to the saloon, or the inn, or a neighbor's doorstep. Sometimes it curdled before it got there, so folks made butter, or soft cheese. Imagine that for a moment. Fresh butter, spread on hot cornbread, steam rising from the crust. No preservatives, no plastic wrap, just taste and patience. Now let's not forget the egg woman. Yes, usually a woman. She'd walk the dusty lanes with a basket on her hip, sometimes in an apron, sometimes barefoot, eggs clinking softly inside wrapped in scraps of cloth. No cartons, no labels, just trust. You knew her by name, and she knew which hens were laying best. If she liked you, she gave you the larger ones. If you were late on payment, well, you might get the ones with tiny cracks. That's just how it worked. Then came the brewer, or, if the town was big enough, the brewers. Some saloons made their own beer, others relied on a brewer who worked out of a barn or even a cave, where it stayed naturally cooler. Beer was brewed in barrels, thick, cloudy, sometimes sour. Each brew tasted different, depending on the yeast, the grain, even the wood of the barrel. No two batches were ever quite the same, but no one minded, because when it was cold, and foamy, and served in a pewter mug, it was perfect, especially after a long day on horseback, or behind a plow. And now, here's something softer. Some suppliers weren't businesses at all. They were just people, like the widow who grew herbs in her windowsill, mint, sage, thyme, and sold bunches tied with string, or the quiet boy who trapped wild rabbits and traded them for tobacco, or the girl who picked wild berries in season and sold pies for a nickel each. These weren't official trades, but they were just as real, and their flavors crept into the stew pot, the coffee, the breakfast plate. Let's pause now and imagine the rear of a saloon, a muddy alley, a wooden door propped open with a brick, suppliers arriving one by one, eggs in a basket, flour in a sack, jars of pickles from someone's root cellar. No one talks much, just nods, maybe a grunt, maybe a thanks, and the cook, he or she stacks the goods on a rickety shelf and gets back to work. That was supply. Simple, quiet, essential. But let's not forget the spice merchants. Now they were rare. But every so often, a traveling wagon would roll into town, with tiny tins and bags tucked into every corner. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, even saffron. Prices were high, usage was careful. A single pinch of cinnamon might last weeks, but oh, the joy it brought. A dash in apple pie, a sprinkle in baked beans, a bit in tea, if someone had the luxury. These spices weren't just for taste. They were tokens of memory, of home, of faraway places, of better days. So you see, though the saloon may have looked like a single building, its food was the product of an entire web of quiet hands. Farmers, butchers, bakers, brewers, gatherers, all linked together, unseen, unspoken, but felt in every bite. And now, Finn, as you close your eyes a little more, imagine a wooden cart gently rocking over gravel, eggs swaying in straw, butter wrapped in cloth, and somewhere nearby a boy chasing a chicken through the dust, laughing softly. This was how food traveled in the Wild West, and how peace often followed behind. The saloon quiets. The piano's last notes have faded into the wood. Bootsteps echo a little softer now, and most of the crowd has staggered home, bellies full and minds foggy. But for some, the night is just beginning. Bellies full and minds foggy. But for some, the night is just beginning. Bellies full and minds foggy. But for some, the night is just beginning. Bellies full and minds foggy. But for some, the night is just beginning. Bellies full and minds foggy. But for some, the night is just beginning. Bellies full and minds foggy. Bellies full and 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 bellies fallen, 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 bellies fallen. It's in these still hours, just before midnight, or just after, that the saloon changes. No longer a stage for laughter, gambling and boots stomping the floor. Now it becomes a kind of kitchen chapel. Just a low light burning, the soft sound of cutlery being washed, and maybe the warm crackle of one last log in the stove. This is when the after-hours food would quietly appear, not for customers, no, but for the saloon's own people, the cook, the barkeep, the sleepy girl sweeping up cards from under tables, maybe the sheriff if he stopped by. It wasn't fancy, just warm. A pan of leftover beans gently reheated, a heel of cornbread wrapped in a cloth, a little gravy thinned out with hot water, and coffee, always coffee, though not the strong bitter kind drunk during the day. This was gentler, sometimes made from scorched wheat or roasted chicory when real beans ran low, served in tin mugs, held with both hands, sipped slowly, in near silence. Sometimes these late meals weren't even cooked, they were pieced together, a slice of cheese, a biscuit from the morning batch, salt pork shaved thin and eaten cold, pickled onions, dried apples soft from steam. No ceremony, just hunger, and a need to feel full before sleep. Even the toughest cowpoke liked that last small comfort before turning in. Now, let's follow someone. There he is, the sheriff, hat in hand, badge dulled from the day's dust. He walks through the swinging doors not with a stomp, but a sigh. He doesn't order, he just nods, and the cook, already cleaning the counter, wipes his hands and reaches for the same skillet he's used all day. He tosses in a spoonful of beans, maybe an old egg if there's one left, a slice of bread to toast on the edge. The sheriff leans against the counter, no words, just the low hiss of oil and the gentle click of the stove iron as it warms again. This was routine. This was the end of the day, spelled out in crumbs and steam. Back in the kitchen there's always something simmering, even this late, a stock made from bones, a pot of onions boiling down into something thick and sweet, bread dough rising for the morning, and the cook, she hums softly to herself as she wipes the knife clean, sets it in its spot, and takes a sip of cool water from a tin cup. Her feet ache, her apron smells like gravy and ash, but her work is almost done. Just one more plate, one more pan, one more sigh, then she'll hang her towel, stretch her back, and sit for a moment before bed. And outside, the world has gone quiet too. The wind brushes dust across the porch. A stray dog curls beside a barrel. The moon glows faintly behind a cloud, like butter melting through flour. Everything is soft now. Even the stars blink slower. But let's go back inside. To the girl mopping the floor. She's young, face still round, voice still soft, but she's strong. She hums as she works, one hand on the mop, one foot bare. She finds an old biscuit under a table, still wrapped in paper, sniffs it, smiles, pockets it for later. That'll be her dinner. She'll eat it sitting on the back steps, legs swinging into the dark, listening to the coyotes call. Somewhere near the piano, a mouse tiptoes across the floor. It's found a crumb of jerky left behind by a careless cowboy. It nibbles quietly, unbothered. This saloon belongs to it now, at least until dawn. Everything slows. The saloon creaks in the night, wood settling, floorboards sighing like old men. Even the clock ticks softer now. Tick, tick. Yes, even time seems to know it must hush. Sometimes the cook makes something special. For herself, maybe. A small pot of rice, stirred slowly, salted with a pinch of lard or tallow, topped with a soft-boiled egg, if one was left uncracked. It was her comfort dish. She'd eat it standing up, one spoon at a time, as the world dozed around her, steam rising like ghost stories. This wasn't on any menu, but it was more real than anything served during the day. This was food meant for peace, for survival, for silence. The late hours also had visitors, unusual ones, a father with a feverish child, a woman fleeing a storm, dress soaked and face pale, a prospector with eyes like fire, carrying gold dust in a pouch and hunger in his bones. They didn't come for cards or whiskey, they came for soup, or warmth, or just to sit. The cook would ladle something into a bowl, no charge, no questions, and let them be. That was the unspoken law of the saloon at night. Food, when no one else would give it. Shelter, when the wind grew too cruel. Can you see it? The saloon, not as a rowdy place of cheers and songs, but as a refuge, a lantern in the desert, a pot of beans for the weary, a slice of bread for the lost. That's what food became, after midnight. It wasn't about flavor or money, it was about kindness. And kindness, Finn, tastes like nothing else, even when it's just stale bread and cold coffee. So now, as the fire dies down to coals, and the cook finally lays her head on a folded cloth, and the saloon settles like a sleeping animal, let's rest too, because sometimes the best meals are the ones eaten in silence, under stars, with nothing but the sound of breathing, and the comfort of knowing, tomorrow there will be breakfast. The first light is barely touching the windows, just a pale golden sliver creeping through the wooden slats. The saloon still smells like last night whiskey, ash, sweat, and slow-cooked beans. But now something else joins it. The smell of bread, before even the roosters start calling, before boots hit the dusty road. There's a hand pulling open the back door of the saloon kitchen. It's the baker. She doesn't speak much. Her eyes are always half closed, her apron always dusted with flour. She's older, with soft skin like worn linen, and a knot of hair tied with string. And every morning, she brings silence with her. Only the flour speaks, when it lifts into the air and settles like snow across the countertop. The dough is already waiting. She left it the night before, a soft mound rising slow beside the hearth. Now she presses into it gently, palms moving
moving in circles. It sighs beneath her hands. It's a living thing, this dough. Sticky, warm, sleepy, and it smells like mornings used to smell, before alarm clocks, before gas stoves, when bread told you the day had begun. One loaf at a time, then another, and another, rounded, scored, nestled into blackened pans, each shaped with care, not precision, no two exactly alike. Sometimes the tops cracked unevenly, sometimes they leaned a little to the side, but oh, the scent. If comfort had a voice, it would sound like rising bread. She doesn't speak, not because she's unfriendly, but because the bread needs quiet. She listens to the creaks of the boards above, the way the fire breathes through the stovepipe, and the faint rustle of her own sleeves. Her rhythm never changes. Dust, knead, fold, shape, dust, knead, fold, shape, until the whole counter is lined with sleeping loaves, waiting to wake in the oven. Now the kitchen starts to hum a little. The morning girl arrives, takes off her shawl, ties her apron, and starts the eggs, not scrambled fast and hot like in modern diners, but slow, in cast iron, cracked carefully, so the yolks sit still in their little white ponds. She tilts the pan, lets the whites curl at the edges, sprinkles on a pinch of salt, coarse, flaky, carried in a jar from the back shelf. No pepper. Pepper was rare, and expensive, but there might be chili flakes, if a cowboy left some behind. The coffee pot begins to gurgle. That old sound again. Water, rising through grounds, turning black and strong and earthy. But this isn't the bitter brew from last night. This is fresh, hot. It smells like rain-soaked dirt and roasted wood. They serve it in enamel mugs, each chipped a little, each with a different story. One was brought from Kansas, one was traded for eggs, one has a small blue flower painted on its rim, now half faded. The first customer today. It's the blacksmith. You can tell by the soot on his cuffs. He doesn't sit at a table, just leans near the stove, hands out, soaking in the heat. The morning girl pours him a mug without asking, sets it on the counter with 2 biscuits and a slice of fried salt pork. He grunts. That means thank you, and they both understand. Next comes the teacher. A woman in her 40s, tired eyes but kind ones. She walks with her shoulders straight, hair pinned tight. She asks for oats, the slow kind, boiled in milk, not water, topped with a little brown sugar if there's any left. Sometimes she brings her own, and always, she eats with her book open, pages marked in pencil, sentences underlined 3 times. She teaches children who have to be told, again and again, how to hold a pencil, how to listen, how to trust, and she needs a quiet breakfast. She finds it here. Outside, the sun finally climbs above the roofs. Dust begins to shimmer in the light. Chickens call. A dog trots across the road, sniffing for scraps, and the saloon doors creak as they open, one by one, slowly, as though the building itself were yawning. Breakfast becomes a gathering, but not loud, not chaotic, just soft voices, forks clinking, steam rising from plates. A woman feeds her baby with one hand, eats with the other. A prospector rolls a gold nugget between his fingers while chewing toast. A young boy shares his biscuit with a crow perched on the windowsill. Everyone finds something to eat, even if it's just bread dipped in coffee. Simple, warm, enough. And then, there's the back table, where the cook finally sits, after all the others have been served. She eats in silence too. Half a boiled potato, a slice of yesterday's cheese, bread torn from the edge of a loaf, still warm inside. She dips it in the fat from the eggs, closes her eyes, and for a few seconds, nothing moves. The town is waking, but she is resting. Sometimes a traveler wanders in, from far off, dirty boots, empty belly, no coin. But the girl at the counter sees the hunger in his eyes, and she nods. She hands him a plate with beans and a biscuit, and she doesn't speak. Kindness doesn't need explaining. The baker returns, brushes flour from her hands, and sets a small plate on the counter. One special bun, still warm, dusted with sugar. She only makes one a day. Whoever gets it. It's their lucky morning. Outside, the horses begin to neigh. Wagons creak, children laugh on their way to the schoolhouse, and the saloon, once a haven for shouting and gunfire, has become something else. For just these few hours, it is a kitchen, a home, a hearth in a town made of grit and dust. So now, as the light fills the room, as mugs empty, as plates scrape clean, and as chairs tuck back under the tables, let's leave them, let's slip away, back into quiet. Because in this town, breakfast isn't just food, it's a kind of peace, soft, warm, like a blanket pulled over your shoulders, or the last bite of bread before the day begins. Now the light is fully awake. It pours through the saloon windows, in long slanting beams, touching the tables, warming the floorboards, and wrapping the room in that hazy, honey-colored stillness that only midday can bring. Outside, boots scuff the dirt, the town creaks under the sun's weight, and inside the saloon, the energy is different now. Not like the hush of breakfast. Now it's slow, sleepy buzz, murmurs, silverware tapping, spoons stirring through thick stew. The saloon isn't noisy, but it's alive. A place for worn-out bodies to rest, and hungry ones to feed. Behind the counter, the cook sharpens her knife. Not fast, not aggressive, just shop, like a lullaby for the meat. She's getting ready for lunch. And in the Wild West, lunch wasn't just a meal. It was a pause, in a place where not much ever slowed down. Let's see what's cooking today. There it is, the pot roast, simmering since morning in a blackened Dutch oven. The meat has softened into strands, falling apart with just the nudge of a spoon, swimming in gravy thickened with flour, onion, and maybe a bit of yesterday's coffee. Yes, coffee in the gravy. It sounds strange, but out here, you used what you had, and what you had, you didn't waste. Next to it, beans again, but not just plain string beans. These have salt pork stirred in, the fat melted down, coating every little speckled bean in rich, smoky comfort. And beside the beans, cornbread, golden, crumbly, a little dry, but that's what the gravy's for. Ah, even now you can feel it, how the meal fits together, how one thing leans into the next, like puzzle pieces from a prairie kitchen. Across the room, a few ranch hands take their usual corner table. They don't talk much, just eat with one hand and fan themselves with the other. The heat makes even chewing feel like work. One of them picks at his food slowly, pushes a piece of bread into the gravy, then eats it like he's remembering something but not saying what. At another table, there's a traveling dentist. Yes, even in these dusty towns, he's only passing through, but the saloon girl recognizes him. He's been here before. She brings him a plate without asking. Sliced beef tongue on rye bread, a local specialty. He winces at the first bite, not because it tastes bad, but because he knows how tough it is to chew with a sore tooth. He's the one who pulls them, but he never forgets the feeling. The midday customers don't linger. They eat, they tip their hats, and they leave. There's always something to do. Shoes to fix, cattle to wrangle, letters to send, but for these few minutes, they sit, they pause, and they let the saloon become a shade tree in the desert. Even the bartender seems slower, wipes a glass without urgency, leans on the counter with one elbow, staring out the window like he's listening for something only he can hear. Let's step into the kitchen again. Ah, she's making chicken dumplings now, the kind that take time.
Thick, pillow-soft dough dropped into bubbling broth. Not quite a soup, not quite a stew, somewhere in between. The smell of thyme, pepper, and roasted chicken rises into the rafters, and someone nearby, an old man with a dusty hat, smiles without knowing why. An old man with a dusty hat smiles without knowing why. An old man with a dusty hat smiles without knowing why. There's something almost holy about this moment. The clink of a ladle, the low bubble of stew, the whisper of feet across wooden floors. No music, no loud laughter, just a steady rhythm of feeding and fading. This is what a saloon became at noon. Not wild, not loud, but grounded and warm. Every now and then a child sneaks in, peeks around the doorway, eyes wide, nose twitching. The saloon girl catches his gaze, doesn't scold. She cuts a piece of cornbread, wraps it in a cloth, and hands it to him with a wink. He vanishes like a shadow, but the smile stays. At the back table, a woman eats alone. Her dress is plain, her hands are calloused. She's not from the town, just passing through. But today she needed a meal. She ordered liver and onions, a bit strong-smelling. Not for everyone, but to her, it smells like home. Her father used to make it on Sundays. Now she eats it slowly, carefully, as though it might disappear if she chews too fast. Ah, and here come the miners, 3 of them, faces streaked with coal, eyes half shut. They order everything: roast, beans, cornbread, stew. They pile their plates like men who know hunger, and they eat like men who don't know when the next meal might come. Outside, the sun hangs high above the street. Everything glows, even the dust. And inside the saloon, the shadows get shorter, the air heavier. Someone opens the front doors, lets in a breeze. It's dry and hot, but it stirs the room like a fan. Curtains flutter, steam curls from the stew pot, and for just a second, the saloon sighs, like a creature content. Now the lunch crowd is thinning. Empty plates, crumbs, mugs half full and cooling fast. The cook sits down again. A small plate of boiled eggs, a pickle, a leftover dumpling. She eats with her eyes closed. And not to sleep, just to savor. The quiet, the heat, the work done well, and the saloon, it rests, not for long. Soon it will wake again, for the chaos of night. But for now, the saloon has done its job. It has fed the town, filled bellies, softened tempers, and made room for a little stillness, even in a place built on noise. So let's slip back out now, quietly, like steam through a cracked window. Let the sun warm your skin, let the dust settle on your boots, and listen, just for a moment, to the sound of chewing, sipping, and soft talk, because in the Wild West, a saloon at midday wasn't just a place to drink, it was a place to pause, to breathe, and to eat a meal that reminded you were still human. Ah, evening. It comes slow in the Wild West. At first, just a slight dimming. Then, the golden hush of twilight. Outdoors, the sky stretches into soft oranges and pinks, like it's been dusted with flour and fire. Inside the saloon, the shadows grow longer. Lamps are lit, one by one, not all at once. Just a gentle flicker here, a quiet glow there, until the whole place feels like a lantern, warm and held together with the softest kind of light. Even the sound changes. During the day, it was footsteps and murmurs. Now there's laughter, cards slapping on tables, boots tapping against wooden floors, and the low, slow creak of a rocking chair in the corner. This is when the saloon begins to truly wake up. It's not chaotic yet, not wild, just alive, like the town has come home from its chores. Dusty shirts loosened, hats tilted back, eyes tired but ready for something, even if it's just a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. And yes, that's what they're serving now. Evening food in a Western saloon. It wasn't always extravagant, but it was thoughtful. Simple things, comforting things, things that reminded tired cowboys that somebody was still cooking just for them. Tonight, there's shepherd's pie on the menu. Mashed potatoes browned on top. Underneath, ground beef with peas, onions, and carrots, held together with beef drippings and butter. It smells like like quiet joy, like earth and fire and belly-deep satisfaction. Next to it, a bubbling oxtail stew, cooked so long the meat falls apart like clouds pulled from the sky. Bones left in for flavor, picked clean by practiced hands, served with a wedge of sourdough bread, with a crackling crust and soft middle. That bread, it came from the back oven. You wouldn't believe how carefully the cook tends to it. Even when the saloon is buzzing, she watches that bread like it's a newborn. And then, they bring out the pie. Homemade, of course, but not fancy. There's no sugar to spare. Instead, it's made from dried apples, soaked in boiled water until soft again. Cinnamon stolen from a traveler's trade, crust folded by hand. You might taste a little burnt flour here and there, but somehow, that makes it perfect, especially with a black cup of Cowboy coffee, boiled hard in a pot that's never been truly cleaned, dark as coal, and comforting as a lullaby. The crowd now, well, it's a mix. Miners, gamblers, cowboys, and a few women in lace and boots who know how to hold a room with just a glance. At the far end of the saloon, someone tunes a fiddle. He's not in a hurry. He's not even sure if he'll play tonight, but the notes drift through the air like wood smoke, soft, unfinished, kind of like a whisper before sleep. Behind the counter, the bartender moves with rhythm. He's poured so many drinks his hand knows the shape of every glass without looking. But tonight, not everyone wants whiskey. Some order milk, some want a plate of stew and nothing else, and one man, new in town, asks for a bowl of grits. Just grits. He says nothing, eats them plain, stares at the floor like he's remembering someone he left behind. A woman in a pale blue dress sits at the window. She doesn't speak to anyone. She eats her meal slowly, pickled eggs, rye toast, and a few slices of salt beef, one by one, like each bite is a memory, or a map. Or maybe both. No one interrupts her. They all know. Some nights are meant for eating in silence, just letting the food talk instead. And outside, the sky is darker now. A thin ribbon of stars has begun to unfurl above the town. You can't hear them, of course, but if you stand still, you can almost feel the hush they bring. Inside, the saloon's mood deepens. Someone starts playing the fiddle now, gently. The tune is soft. A waltz, maybe, but played as if each note is stitched together with velvet. The clinking of silverware slows, conversation falls to whispers, and the food, still warm, still waiting on the counter. A dish of hominy, a bowl of hot beef with onions, a sweet cornbread muffin baked fresh just before sunset. Even the smell of food begins to shift. Less spice, more smoke, more depth, like everything has leaned into the night. And somehow, even the wood walls seem to breathe. Over by the fireplace, an old man has dozed off, an untouched plate beside him, mashed sweet potatoes with bacon bits, a boiled egg, some greens fried in pork fat. Nobody wakes him. Someone just puts a napkin over the food. It'll be there when he stirs. That's the thing about saloons at night. They weren't just loud places of liquor and laughter. Sometimes, they were cradles for tired people, hungry people, wandering people who needed something soft, even if they couldn't ask for it. You can hear a few murmurs now. Someone's telling a story about a cattle drive that went wrong, about a brother that never came back, about a pie his mother used to make with molasses and cornmeal, and how it tasted better than any gold he ever panned. And in the kitchen, the last batch of dumplings steams quietly. The cook hums an old song no one else knows. She moves slowly now, her day nearly done, but she's smiling, because even if no one says it, she knows she's fed the whole town, one quiet soul at a time. So let's take one more look before we slip away. The warm light, the food, still gently steaming, the clatter of spoons fading, and a hush falling across the room like a blanket. This is a saloon at twilight. It's not chaos, it's not noise, it's peace, served in bowls, folded in napkins, and poured gently into mugs. The night has now fully arrived. You can barely see the outline of the mountains outside the windows, just shadows, leaning in. Inside the saloon, the air has thickened, not in a bad way, just softer, slower, like every corner is filled with the warmth of people quietly settling into their place. Yes, the crowd hasn't grown louder, it's grown quieter. In fact, most of the plates are empty now, just a few bowls being scraped with spoons. You can hear it, a low sound, steady, almost like someone thinking aloud with cutlery. In the back corner, the cook sits down for the first time today, her apron still on, smudged with flour and stew. She doesn't eat with the rest of them. She's saved a small plate for herself, just pickled green beans, a biscuit, and a slice of spiced carrot cake. That cake, it's not the fancy kind, just grated carrots, a bit of lard, some cinnamon bark boiled into sugar water. But when she takes that first bite, it's like the whole room breathes out with her. Meanwhile, a man walks in, late. You can tell by the dust on his boots he's been riding for hours. He doesn't speak, just nods, sits at the bar, and asks for one thing: warm beans and cornbread, nothing more. The bartender nods, no questions, just plates it, hot from the iron skillet, still bubbling from the fire, with a square of lard melting into the cornbread like snow on stone. You see, that's the beauty of late-night food in a Wild West saloon. It wasn't about menus, or ingredients flown in from somewhere fancy. It was about what could be shared, what could be warmed, what could be softened. It was about sitting down, and letting the world fall away with every bite. Some saloons even had late-night eggs, boiled in water black from fire soot, cracked open with one hand, dusted with salt, eaten in 2 bites. Simple. But to a man who spent 12 hours digging silver or herding stubborn cattle across dry land, that egg was heaven. And you wouldn't believe how many people asked for soup.
even in summer, especially at night, because soup carried secrets. Every saloon had its own kind. Some had a thin broth with floating cabbage leaves. Others used chicken bones boiled all day, giving it a milky richness. Sometimes they threw in barley, dried herbs from a windowsill pot, or even just an old potato chopped in uneven chunks. It wasn't about what went in, it was about how it felt going down, and did it feel good? Hot food, in a cool room, eaten slowly, by people who barely spoke a word. Some brought their own cups, tin mugs, dented and blackened. Others just took whatever the bartender handed them. No one minded. They were too tired to mind. And yet, somehow, not too tired to appreciate. Now, if you walk softly to the far end of the room, you'd find the card table, still active, but not loud, just the sound of cards being flicked, chips being pushed, and someone eating roasted peanuts, shell by shell. That's all he wanted, just peanuts, and maybe a cup of hot chicory drink. Someone else asks for a bowl of rice pudding. You'd think that's odd for a saloon, wouldn't you? But it was a favorite. Cooked slow, milk thickened by time, sweetened by molasses or sorghum when they had it, spiced with cinnamon, sometimes even topped with a few chopped dates, if the trader wagon had passed through that week. The pudding arrives in a small ceramic bowl, chipped around the edge, still steaming. He doesn't even wait for it to cool. He eats it slowly, eyes closed, like he's eating a memory instead of a dessert. And across the room, there's a couple, quiet. They share one plate, a biscuit split in two, some dried sausage, cut into slices, a few slivers of apple, soaked in whiskey. They say nothing, but their hands touch now and then, just brushing, as if they're more full of feeling than food. Now, the fire in the hearth is low, crackling just enough to be noticed, but not enough to bother, and someone has started to hum, not a full song, just a few notes, a lullaby maybe. No one joins in, but they all hear it. Somewhere it rests in the back of the room, between the fork and knife clinks, and the creak of a loose floorboard. At this hour, people stop asking for alcohol. They start asking for tea, Cowboy tea, boiled water poured over dried pine needles, sometimes mixed with bits of ginger or wild mint, served in whatever cup they had left. One man sips it with both hands, eyes closed, hat tipped back, just letting the warmth wrap around his ribs. And now the room is almost still, just a few people left. Most have gone back to their bunks, some asleep at their tables, a few curled up on benches. The last dish is scrubbed in cold water, and stacked upside down to dry. The cook, she blows out one lantern, then another, until only one remains. It glows like a tiny moon, and you can hear the wind outside now, not howling, just brushing against the walls like a lullaby. This is the heart of a Wild West saloon at night. It wasn't all dancing and danger. Sometimes, it was soup. It was biscuits. It was two people sharing a plate under one dim lamp. It was warm beans on a tired stomach, and silence. Good, whole, restful silence. So take one more moment here, smell the last of the stew in the air, watch the final flicker of fire, and listen to the sound of a room that knows how to rest. Because tomorrow, the boots will stomp again, the bar will clink again, but tonight, we let it all fall quiet. You might think everything's been said about a saloon by now. Food on the plates, boots by the door, songs half sung into the dark. But the truth is, when a saloon gets this quiet, this still, that's when it begins to whisper its oldest secrets. Secrets not written down, not remembered in books, but carried in smell, in wood, in the cracks of a floorboard, or the dip in a worn stool. There's one corner, right behind the bar, near the shelf with the cracked bottles. If you were to lean close, softly now, you'd catch a scent, not just whiskey, something sweeter, something baked. You wouldn't guess it at first, but late at night, when the regulars have drifted out.
The bartender's daughter, maybe 12 years old, cheeks always flour-dusted, she slips into that space. She doesn't speak, she just carries a small pan, lines it with scraps of dough she saved from dinner biscuits, fills it with dried fruit soaked in molasses, tucks it into the coals, and waits. She calls it coal pie. No one taught her, she made it up. It's not a pie like the big towns have. No pastry edges, no golden gloss, but it smells like home, like someone remembered to be kind. When it's done, just warm, never hot, she pulls it out with 2 sticks, and shares it only with the cook. Just 2 spoons. That's all. 2 spoons scraping the blackened pan. 2 tired smiles that never say a word. You see, food in the Wild West wasn't about hunger alone. Sometimes, it was about quiet care. The kinds of care you don't shout about, like a dish washed with hot water and ash, or beans picked clean of stones before boiling, or bread risen without yeast, left beside a warm stove under a wool cloth, just long enough. These small kindnesses, they didn't make it into photographs or stories, but they lived in saloons, in little moments that kept people alive inside. Now, let me take you to the back hallway, not where customers go, the place where crates are stored wrapped in burlap and rope tight. Inside some of them, tins of sweetened condensed milk, a treasure, sometimes kept for weeks, sometimes opened on a cold night and eaten by the spoonful, so thick, so creamy, so quiet. They didn't even talk while eating it, they just leaned against the wall, eyes closed, letting the sugar melt into their bones. And just beside those crates, a sack, always one sack, filled with popcorn kernels. Now, Popcorn wasn't just for fancy theatres later on. Even out here, they'd pop it over fire and drizzle it with syrup made from boiled down wild plums. Sticky, soft, it would cling to your fingers, and they'd have to lick them clean. Some claimed it helped with homesickness. Maybe it did. Now here's something even softer. Sometimes, just sometimes, someone would bring out a can of peaches, canned by someone's mother, far away. They'd open it carefully, as if the sound of the tin might break the spell. Then they'd pour the juice into a cup, share it, each sip tasting like memory. The peaches would be served last, on a cracked plate, soft enough to cut with a spoon, and in that quiet moment, every single person eating remembered someone they missed. That's what peaches did. They reminded. Now, not every saloon had these things. Many didn't. But the ones that did, they had a kind of hush to them at night. Like the building itself knew it was holding more than noise. It was holding people. Tired people. Lonely people. People who didn't want to fight or drink. Just sit and eat something that didn't make them feel forgotten. One cowboy once said, food at night tastes different. It listens more. And somehow, everyone around him understood. So here's what they might eat before bed. A cup of hot molasses water. A small square of dried apple cake. Leftover beans with cold cornbread crumbled in. A boiled potato with butter, if they had it. Or just a spoonful of lard and honey, melted together, sipped like soup. These were their desserts. Simple, odd maybe, but warm, and quiet. Always quiet. Now let me show you something not eaten, but felt. The final warmth of a pan, still glowing with heat. Though the fire is gone, the cook would sometimes place her hands over it, not to cook, just to warm. Her knuckles swollen, her wrists sore. But that heat, it told her the day was done, that she could stop, just for now. And outside, there was always one or two still sitting on the porch bench, eating nothing, just sipping coffee boiled black and strong, staring at the stars, letting the wind kiss their faces. The food might be gone, the plates cleaned, but the comfort stayed. It filled the walls, it soaked into the floorboards, it stayed in the smell of ash and biscuit and salt pork. So when someone asks you what food was served at Wild West saloons, tell them, yes, there were beans, yes, there was bacon, yes, there was bread and stew and eggs and coffee, but also tell them there was coal pie, peach syrup, popcorn with plum glaze, and silence, so full it could feed a man. Here we are, another night, and the saloon's doors are barely swinging now. Only a soft creak remains, one that drifts back and forth like a lullaby of old wood. Most of the chairs have been turned upside down on the tables. The spittoons have been emptied, the poker chips are tucked away in velvet-lined drawers, but something still lingers in the air. It's not noise, not music, not even footsteps. It's memory, and memory, it clings to things, to food especially. So tonight, let's not talk about just what they ate. Let's talk about how they ate, how it felt, what it meant to sit with a bowl, and silence, and stars just beyond the window. Out back, past the crates and barrels, there's a spot. Yes, a little half shed made from leftover boards and 2 bent nails. They called it the cook's corner. No one asked why. Because, well, you don't question sacred things. That's where the cook prepared what she called midnight meal. Now don't let the name fool you. It wasn't grand. Most nights it was the humblest spread you could imagine. A wedge of cold cornbread, a chunk of hard cheese, and a small bowl of beans, slow cooked for hours in bacon grease and rainwater. But when you've worked since dawn, when your hands feel made of dust, when your stomach sighs instead of growling, that meal, it felt like a prayer. Each bowl was passed carefully, one hand to the next, no words, just nods, grunts, little hums of approval, and when the cornbread crumbled too dry, they poured coffee over it. Hot, bitter coffee, not sweet, not soft, but real, and it woke the last bit of spirit in their ribs, long enough to get them to the cot, or the chair, or the porch floor, wherever sleep decided to find them. But now, let me take you inside again, not the main room, the side room, the one they used for card games and whispers. Tonight though, it's not for games, it's for stew, thick lumpy stew, made from whatever survived the day, a carrot found under a crate, a bit of squirrel meat caught out near the ridge, 3 potatoes, boiled down to soft skin, a half onion bruised and weeping, all of it, dropped into a dented iron pot, and left on the coals to bubble slow. It didn't look like much, but that scent, it traveled through the saloon like a story being told in steam. They ate it with their fingers sometimes, other times with chipped spoons, bent from years of use. No bowls, just a shared pan passed in a circle, each man, each woman, taking just enough then passing it on. There was something almost holy in that. No hoarding, no boasting, just quiet sharing, like every bite whispered, I see you, I'm still here too. Sometimes, someone would pull out a jar, not of whiskey, not of pickles, but of honey, thick dark honey from an old hive near the edge of town. They would drizzle it on hardtack, or mix it with water to drink slow, and when they did, even the roughest cowhand would go still, eyes closing for just a moment, as if remembering a childhood they'd buried under dust and grit. Honey had that power, and then there was jerky. You'd think jerky was just trail food, but no, at night, jerky became something else. They'd soak it in broth till it softened, tear it apart with fingers, let it melt with mashed beans or fried bread, and with every bite they chewed the miles they'd walked.
Each chew, a memory of a trail, of a town left behind, of a letter never written. Let's pause here a second. See that oil lamp on the bar? It's the last light, the only one still flickering. There's a shadow behind it. That's the old saloon keeper. He's not eating, just sipping a glass of warmed milk, warmed by placing the glass right above the fire until it steamed a little. He said it helped with the aches. No one argued. He sat like that every night, glass in hand, eyes half closed, listening to the silence grow full. And outside? Well, that's where the second meal sometimes happened. The one not talked about much. When someone couldn't sleep, they'd sneak to the kitchen, grab whatever scraps remained, a broken biscuit, a slice of dried apple, even a bit of butter left on wax paper. They'd walk out to the back steps, sit beneath the stars, and eat like it was a secret worth keeping. Not rushed, not loud, just small bites, and the sound of crickets as company. Let me tell you about one of those nights. A young woman, maybe 17, who worked cleaning the floors. She didn't eat during regular meals. She waited until everyone had gone quiet. Then she'd collect the scraps no one noticed. One night she found an egg, just one, still warm from the coop out back. She took a bit of tallow, melted it in a pan over the smallest flame, cracked the egg, fried it slow, and ate it right off the blade of a flat knife. She said it tasted like peace, and no one ever knew her name. This is what food really meant in saloons. It wasn't menus, or meals. It was comfort, disguised as leftovers. It was care served in quiet. It was warmth, found in scraps. Now, let's walk through the kitchen one last time. Feel the floorboards underfoot, see the cracked window pane, smell the mix of smoke, stew and flour, and know that this was how the West was fed. Not just with meat and beans, but with moments. Moments like fingers brushing over bread, a shared spoon, a soft sigh after the last bite. There was a kind of stillness after a meal like that, like the building itself exhaled, the plates stacked, the knives wiped clean, the fire left to sleep, and out in the distance, a coyote might howl, but even that sounded like it respected the quiet of a good meal. And out in the distance, a coyote might howl, but even that sounded like it respected the quiet of a good meal. Timed weight pain. And quieter than most, the kind of quiet that presses into your skin and makes every sound feel like it matters more, like the soft click of a lantern being hung, or the scratch of someone's beard as they settle into their chair. And inside that stillness, the saloon seems even older than usual, like it's breathing slower, remembering, not just meals, not just drinks, but the people who passed through its doors, their habits, their hungers, their small secret rituals. Tonight, we don't talk about what they ate, but about why food mattered so much, even when it came in a tin plate, even when it was burnt, or cold, or nearly gone. Let's walk together slowly, back to that small side hallway. Do you see the faded door, the one just left of the barrel rack? That's the storeroom. Not locked, never locked, because what was inside wasn't worth stealing, or maybe it was too precious to lock away. Old burlap sacks tied with twine, cracked glass jars full of pickled things floating like ghosts, barrels filled with flour, not enough to bake a cake but just enough to thicken a soup, and tucked in one corner, a tin of cinnamon, almost empty, just a whisper of spice inside. That cinnamon, they used it for special nights, birthdays, babies born, men returning from a long cattle run. They'd stir it into hot milk, or sprinkle it over fried apples. It didn't make the food fancy, but it made it feel like someone remembered you. That was worth more than gold. Out in the main room, the poker table has been cleared. Tonight, someone set it for a late meal. But not just for eating, for remembering. They do this now and then. Someone lights every lantern, polishes the brass, lays out a full spread, beans, biscuits, jerky, dried fruit, coffee, and a single square of chocolate passed down from someone's uncle. They call it ghost supper, not for ghosts exactly, but for people they miss. Each plate represents someone who's gone, someone who sat here once, laughed here once, leaned back in that creaky chair, and told a bad joke. They don't speak during ghost supper. They chew slowly, sip coffee, let silence do the talking. Sometimes, someone starts humming, just one soft tune, maybe a lullaby their mother used to sing, and others join in, not singing, just humming, like the wind moving across tall grass. That's a meal too, not made with fire or flour, but made with memory, with care. Now, let's step outside again, shall we? Out to the stables, not far, just a few paces through packed dirt and old wagon ruts. There's a stable boy there, young, barely 12, smells like hay and horses. He doesn't eat inside with the others, not because he can't, he just likes the quiet. Likes to sit in the loft, legs dangling over the edge, eating his supper from a tin pail. Tonight, just cold potatoes mashed with a bit of lard, and 2 pieces of dried apple. Nothing fancy, but he eats it like it's a treasure, because it is, because it's his, because for one small moment, as he sits up there under the rafters with the horses shifting below and stars hanging above, he feels full, not just in his belly, but in his heart. Back inside, there's a woman, older now, used to be a singer, used to fill this saloon with songs every Saturday night. Her voice doesn't carry the way it used to, but her hands, still sharp. She bakes, not every night, just when the wind is right. She uses a little skillet and makes something they call sky cakes. They're thin, crisp around the edges, cooked in bacon fat and dusted with a bit of sugar if there's any to spare. No recipe, she just knows, and when they're done,
She stacks them in a soft cloth, folds it up, and leaves them on the bar for whoever finds them first. She doesn't wait for thanks, she just smiles and says hope it helps the night go down smooth. Now, look there, in the furthest booth. That's where the old gambler sits, always alone, but always watching. His plate, always the same. A boiled egg, half a biscuit, a spoonful of molasses. No one knows why. He never changes it, never says a word, but he eats every bite. Slowly, deliberately, like each one seals a memory he doesn't want to lose. And then, there's the saloon dog. Yes, even he has his spot. A little bowl near the back stove. They feed him bones, scraps, bits of gravy-soaked bread. He's old now, white around the muzzle, eyes a little cloudy, but when he eats, the tail still thumps, soft and steady, like a heartbeat made of thanks. So, when we ask what food was served at Wild West saloons, we mustn't stop at just beans or bacon or coffee. No, we must look at the ways they ate, the whens and the whys, the late-night spoonfuls, the cinnamon stirred into milk, the egg on a knife, the silence shared around a table. These were meals, not for nutrition only, but for grounding, for holding each other, for holding on. Tonight, if you listen closely, the saloon floorboards still creak, the lantern still swings a little in its frame, and someone, somewhere in that memory, is lifting a spoon to their lips, letting a bit of stew cool on their tongue, and thinking, this is enough. This is the last stretch now, like the final sip of warm coffee on a cold night, or the soft breath you take before drifting off. If you've made it this far, you've walked the long trail. You've stepped over muddy floorboards, sat at every corner table, and tasted every quiet spoonful of the Wild West saloon life. But before we close the door behind us, there's just one more story the saloon wants to tell. Not about meals, not even about the people, but about what the food left behind. Let's go once more to the kitchen. Yes, that little hot room behind the swinging doors. It's early morning now. The sky still dark. The fire from the stove a dull red glow. A pot of beans sits on the coals, barely bubbling. No one's there yet. No boots thumping. No orders shouted. No jokes thrown across the bar. Just the sounds of sleep still clinging to the walls. And the smell. That calm, round smell of something simple cooking slow. It's like time holding its breath. Over on the shelf, someone left behind a little book. Grease-stained, edges curled, cover almost unreadable, but inside, scribbled notes, recipes, sort of, more like memories. One line says, use bacon fat instead of lard, tastes more like home. Another, add a splash of coffee to gravy when you miss your brother. And this one, sky cakes better when eaten by the window. No signatures, no dates, just someone writing down their comforts, their soft edges, the things that help them survive the dust and noise and ache of this place. Let's sit there, right next to the stove. Let the heat reach our hands, and read another line. Let the soup simmer long enough that everyone gets quiet. Yes, that was the real food, wasn't it? Not just what went in your belly, but what settled in your bones, the stillness, the warmth, the waiting. And now, the saloon is empty again. You can almost hear the echo of the day before, chairs scraping, dice rolling, a cough, a laugh, a name shouted across the room. But now, just wind, just dust, and the gentle creak of wood as the walls breathe. The food is gone, the plates washed, the crumbs swept, but something's still here, something always lingers. It's in the small things, like the way the light falls through a bottle on the windowsill, or the dent in the bar from a man who tapped his glass the same way, every night, or that one spot on the stove where the heat always curls upward, always waiting for the next meal, the next story. Sometimes late at night, long after the town has gone quiet, people say they still feel it. A tug, a whisper, like a scent in the air that isn't there anymore, like the memory of coffee brewing far away. They say it feels like something feeding you, even when you haven't eaten a thing. And maybe, just maybe, that's the last gift those old saloons gave. Not just food to fill your belly, but comfort, presence, a calm hand placed quietly on your back, saying you're home now. And if you're still awake, then I think maybe you need to hear it again. From the 17th minute of this story, just listen to that part one more time, or maybe click on the video waiting to the side, the one with another quiet place, another meal in a forgotten time. Maybe it'll help you sleep even better. Goodbye, Finn. Sleep soft, and sleep long.